75,000 years ago, the human species nearly ceased to exist. Not from war, not from disease, not from anything we could have seen coming or fought back against. A volcano erupted on the other side of the planet, and somewhere in the aftermath, the entire human population may have collapsed to a number so small that a single bad winter could have ended us permanently. You are here because of what survived that. Most people, when they think about human extinction events, think about the future. Asteroids, climate collapse, a pathogen we haven't named yet. The assumption is that we've made it this far relatively intact, that the road behind us was survivable in ways the road ahead might not be. That assumption is wrong. The road behind us had a point so narrow that modern geneticists, when they first found the evidence, genuinely weren't sure the numbers were real. Start with what the DNA shows. In the 1990s, researchers began noticing something unusual when they mapped genetic variation across human populations. The diversity was too low. Not slightly low, strangely, almost inexplicably low for a species of our size and geographic spread. Humans living in South Africa, and humans living in northern Scandinavia, and humans living in the highlands of Papua New Guinea share a degree of genetic similarity that doesn't match the pattern you'd expect from a species that has been spreading across continents for hundreds of thousands of years. For comparison, a single troop of chimpanzees living in one forest in West Africa carries more genetic diversity than the entire human species, all 8 billion of us. Every language, every continent, every population on Earth, genetically, we are almost the same. That only happens one way. At some point, the population crashed, hard enough and fast enough that an enormous amount of genetic variation was simply lost. Whatever humans existed before that event, most of their lineages ended. What survived was a narrow slice. And everything alive today, every human being on the planet, descends from that slice. Scientists call this a population bottleneck. The leading explanation for what caused it is a volcano named Toba. Toba sits on the island of Sumatra in what is now Indonesia. 73,000 years ago, it erupted. Not the way volcanoes erupt in documentary footage, lava flows, dramatic smoke columns, the kind of thing you can drive away from. Toba produced what geologists classify as a supervolcanic eruption, a category so rare that nothing comparable has happened in recorded human history. The eruption released an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. To put that in perspective, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens released roughly 1 cubic kilometer. Toba released 2,800 times that. The ashfall alone buried parts of South Asia under layers up to 6 meters deep. Researchers have found Toba ash in cores drilled from the ocean floor across the Indian Ocean, across the Arabian Sea, in lake sediments in East Africa. The material traveled. But the ash wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what followed it into the upper atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide, hundreds of millions of tons of it, injected high enough that it couldn't simply rain out. Up there, sulfur dioxide converts to sulfuric acid aerosols, and those aerosols do something precise and devastating. They reflect sunlight. The estimated temperature drop in the years following Toba ranges from 3 to 15 degrees Celsius depending on the model, with some researchers arguing the most severe cooling may have lasted a decade or longer. Global growing seasons shortened. Vegetation collapsed across entire regions. The food chain, from the bottom, began to fail. This is what humans walked into. In 1998, geneticist Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois published a paper in the Journal of Human Evolution proposing what became known as the Toba Catastrophe theory. His argument was that the timing was not coincidental. The supervolcanic eruption and the evidence of a human genetic bottleneck pointed to the same narrow window. One caused the other. The volcanic winter that followed Toba, he argued, drove the human population to the edge of something it almost didn't come back from. The population estimates that emerge from this research are difficult to absorb. Some models place the surviving human population as low as 10,000 individuals globally. Others went lower. A 2010 analysis by researchers at the University of Utah, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, modeled the bottleneck using mitochondrial DNA and suggested the breeding population may have dropped to as few as 1,280 individuals at its narrowest point. Not total humans, breeding individuals, adults capable of reproduction. At the lowest estimate, the people responsible for continuing the human species could have fit inside a single large building. There were more Neanderthals in Europe at that moment than there were of us anywhere. The debate around Toba has not settled cleanly. Other researchers have pushed back. Archaeological sites in South Africa, particularly Pinnacle Point and Blombos Cave, show evidence of continuous human occupation through the period around Toba's eruption. Stone tools appear above and below the ash layer in some sites in India, which some researchers interpret as evidence that human populations in those regions survived without catastrophic interruption. The counter-argument is not that the eruption was minor, the physical evidence of its scale is not disputed, but that humans, even at that early stage, may have been more resilient and more geographically dispersed than the bottleneck hypothesis originally assumed. What does seem clear is this. Something happened to human genetic diversity at or near this period. Whether Toba caused it alone, contributed to it, or coincided with it by accident, the narrowing is real. The variation that should exist in a species of our age and range is missing. That absence has a shape, and the shape points backward in time to a very specific window. And this is where the story stops being about geology and starts being about something harder to name. Think about what those 1,280 people were carrying. Not metaphorically, literally. Every language that would ever exist, every piece of music, every system of mathematics, every idea about the structure of the universe. All of it, in potential, inside a group of people who had no way of knowing any of it was possible. Who were, in those years, doing the same thing every human group does when the food disappears and the temperature drops and the animals move away. Trying to make it to the next season, moving toward water, staying together. The genetics suggest they were probably clustered in East or South Africa, somewhere the volcanic winter was survivable, somewhere the ecosystem held together just enough. They couldn't have known they were the last. They couldn't have known there had ever been more. That knowledge didn't exist yet. The ability to think about the species as a species, to hold the concept of humanity as a whole and understand its fragility, that requires a kind of abstraction that may not have fully existed in that form 73,000 years ago. What they had was each other, the group, the fire, the accumulated knowledge of how to find food in a world that was no longer giving it easily. Whatever allowed them to survive those years was not written down. It was passed from person to person, season to season, in the only format available: memory, practice, demonstration. The researchers who study this period most carefully tend to resist the word miracle. The survival of that group wasn't miraculous, they'll say. It was contingent: population dynamics, local geography, the particular species of plant that stayed viable in one specific valley, the animal populations that didn't collapse completely, the pathogen that didn't arrive at the wrong moment. An accumulation of ordinary contingencies that happen to break in one direction. Change any of them, and the genetic record we're reading now doesn't exist because nobody is reading it. That is the part the data can't reach. Not the eruption. The eruption is well documented. Not the cooling. The climate record is in the ice cores. Not even the bottleneck. The signal in the DNA is real and measured. What the data can't reach is what those years were like from the inside. What it was to be a member of a species down to its last few thousand people without knowing that's what you were. Without the word species, without the concept of extinction, just the cold and the absence of animals that used to be there and the need to keep going. You are the answer to whether they did. Every person alive today carries the same narrow genetic signature from that period. It doesn't matter which continent, which population, which ancestry. The bottleneck is in all of us. An identical compression point in the human family tree where almost every branch ended at once. When geneticists map it, it looks like a funnel. Enormous diversity going in, a thread coming out. We are the thread. Not because we were the strongest, not because we were the most prepared, but because in one specific region, in one specific period, a small number of people made it through a decade or more of a world that had stopped working the way it was supposed to. And on the other side, they kept going. The volcano is still there. Toba caldera is now a lake, 100 kilometers long, resting inside the crater left by the eruption. It is one of the largest volcanic lakes on Earth. Tourists visit it. People live on the island in its center. They don't think much about what happened there 73,000 years ago. Most people don't. But the record of it is still running, inside every cell of every human being alive. A compression in the code that says, there was a moment. It almost didn't continue. And then, without knowing what they were doing or what it meant, a small group of people made sure that it did.